Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Scares That Shaped Us, a podcast about horror writers and the stories that made them. I'm your host, Matthew Jackson. We have a really fun show for you today. We're doing two guests with two different works talking about one foundational horror story. First up, she is an award-winning, acclaimed screenwriter and novelist whose debut book is called Indigent. It is available right now. And our other guest is one of our favorites, a friend of the show. You will know her from her astonishing debut novel, Sacrificial Animals. Her new book is called The Minimalist, and it is out in August. Briana N. Cox and Kailee Pedersen, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us.
It's my pleasure. It's great to have you both here. Before we get into our topic, which is a very exciting one that I'm very eager to discuss, I do want to spotlight both of your works, both what's out now and what's coming soon. So, as I said, Briana, your book is called Indigent. It is available now. Everyone can go get it. Everyone should go get it. It's fantastic. Briana, for those who don't know about your book, could you give our listeners a little taste of what Indigent is?
Yeah, Indigent is set largely in a single location. So it's a story about an apartment complex in a gentrifying community in Atlanta that is essentially just made much, 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 much worse when a family of squatters arrives to post up in the basement, who is infected with a parasite that does things. Spoilers, it's a cannibal book. And it has a bunch of social horror and body horror elements. So if that sounds like it's up your alley, it is available now pretty much wherever you get books. It's been out for a couple weeks, and I'm super hyped that people can finally read it.
Yeah, it's so much fun, and it for me immediately I was like, oh, this is like a Cronenberg movie, but for working class and poor people in this apartment building in Georgia, which is 100% my jam as someone who grew up in a very working class poor part of Texas. I felt like I knew so many of these people as I was. It's a great ensemble piece. You meet a lot of different characters very quickly as they try to manage their lives in this building that is kind of coming down around them in various ways. What started this book for you? Was it the literary aspect of I'm going to tell this story about all these people in this extremely unfair system trying to get by, or was it I want to tell this cannibal parasite story?
Yeah, I think like so many other writers who have been writing for a long time, there's kind of multiple points of origin for this one. So I recently found a note just on my old laptop from forever ago where I was apparently coming up with the base idea for this story back in 2013. So forever ago in internet time. So I have been wanting to do something with worms and body horror and vampire tropes for a long time. The actual social horror themes and the setting definitely did not come until later, as I became an actual adult who had experience with healthcare and with medical horror and all of these different elements that get touched on in the book. But yeah, the basic B flat, I wanted to write a scary worm thing has apparently been floating around my brain for a while.
I love a scary worm thing. Everyone should go pick up this book. But Kaylee, your book, your next book, your second novel is called The Minimalist. It is out in August. Uh, for those who might not have heard yet, could you give us a little taste of what that is?
Yeah, so The Minimalist is, I would describe as a gruesome and unsettling psychological horror for fans of Tar and the Piano Teacher that portrays a classical composer's essentially descent into madness. So it draws a lot on my background as an adaptee and also as an opera singer, and it goes really deep into the psychological difficulties and the agony and the ecstasy of being a classical musician.
It is such a wonder. I was telling you before we started recording, it is a wonderful first of all, like, you haven't lost the step. All of the promise and beauty of the prose that was in Sacrificial Animals is here in The Minimalist, and it's just a joy to read every paragraph of it. But I was talking to you earlier about how much I love the way that you describe the act of creation, and the way that your main character, whose name is Mia, goes through these uh, agonies, like you said, of trying to figure out how to do this, and her relationship with her mentor and her mentor's son, and all of these other people around them, and the act of composition. How how did you pin that down, trying to, because I've never read it captured in quite that way before. Was that difficult for you to get right?
I think in some sense I mediated my relationship to writing through the novel's portrayal of composing classical music, but at the same time I also just tried to have empathy for the composer that I've sung and the works that I performed and try to understand what it would be like to be in that space and to try to create music from essentially nothing. So some of that was my experiences as a writer, some of that is my experiences in the practice room as a singer, and then I kind of blended them together to try to create something authentic.
What does, and this is a question for both of you, because you both work in disciplines other than prose fiction. Uh, I know, Brianna, you have a lot of experience and a lot of acclaim for your screenwriting and playwriting work. And Kaylee, for you, you have published poetry, and you are also a classical opera singer. Um, what does operating in those other mediums do for you when you get down to writing prose? What does it add? What is it? Does it, or even if it's as simple as, this is a way to reset my brain and focus on a different discipline? What is it? What do you feel like it adds to your prose?
Now, in my experience, since I did a lot of like professional writing in the more collaborative space first, it's allowed me to be much more indulgent, I would say, when I'm actually writing a book. Because when you are writing like a play or a script for film or TV, anything like that, like you are not creating a finished product. Like you are creating a blueprint for other people to use to make a finished product. And you have a bunch of say in what goes on, but you're not trying to make something that's like the ultimate end goal that you're putting out into the world. So I feel like working in that field for so many years really helped me get to a point where I was confident again in writing prose, where what you're writing is it. Like this is what people get. And for a long time, I was kind of burnt out on writing. I think because that being like the end was very intimidating. So being able to work through the path of like script to screenplay to prose and use that as the foundation, I think really helped me just enjoy writing again and enjoy writing prose. Because I hadn't for a very long time at the point that I started drafting this book. And it is actually an adaptation of an unproduced script that I had already, that I was inspired and encouraged to write an adaptation for multiple reasons, pragmatically being like no one wants to give you money for a cannibal movie right now. And also, a lot of people reading it thought like it would benefit from the interiority of a novel format, which I really, really agree with now that it's out and people can actually experience it.
Yeah.
I think for me, music permeates a lot of what I do. I was trained as a musician even before I started to think about becoming a writer. So music is really primal for me in a way that writing kind of isn't. And I think you can see that particularly in my sentences, which I think have a sort of musical quality to them. They have a lot of emphasis on the sonic elements of the text rather than maybe how it should be read or looked at on the page, but really how it sounds in the mind's ear, so to speak. And I think that kind of rise and fall of the intonation, the sort of pitch of the sentences, the phrasing is very influenced by classical music more than maybe like a traditional text might be.
That's really interesting, and I mean, I love that the minimalist is what it is, because you're able to draw a direct line between those two elements. Between, there are so many wonderful descriptions of how music works in that book, and I hope people take that away. Um, so I'm not going to dance around it anymore, because I'm so excited about this topic. This is an interesting episode, like I said at the top, because we've never done two guests with separate projects before. We've done two guests with one project before. But Kailee and Briana came to me with this idea of uh, we want to do an episode that sort of unites our shared interests and our two works that are coming out within a few months of each other. And we want to talk about I Saw the TV Glow, Jane Schoenbrun's amazing 2024 film that it remains one of the best films I saw that year, one of the best films I've seen in the last decade. I love that movie so much. I don't know who wants to start here. I know you wanted to spotlight intersectionality and queer characters and queer horror and all of those things when you came to me with this, but why was I Saw the TV Glow the correct pick for both of you to talk about?
This was one of the initial ones that I thought of when Kaylee came to me with the idea of like, oh, we should talk about a film for some of these. A, because it's more recent, and like B, because I think it's a really great example of like the new weird style of filmmaking that has really, really popped off in the 2020s and beyond, that has a lot of like intersectional messaging. So you see it with Jane Schoenbrun, you see it with Boots Riley, you see it with like Hiro Murai and all of these different people who tend to be either queer or racialized or both, finally trying to work within like this low budget film space to tell like these highly intimate stories. And I just think I Saw the TV Glow is one of the best examples of it. Especially as like a horror and speculative fiction writer, where I just gravitate towards spooky things. It's a very spooky movie. So just base level, I enjoy it for that reason as well.
Yeah.
I think what I found potent about it, particularly, was the way it engages with the past. It's not just like, oh, the past is the backstory of the characters, which is somehow sometimes that's how that's deployed in horror fiction or horror movies, but that the past is like something actively engaged with through the medium of this like 1990s nostalgia for a Buffy style, TV show that these teenagers watch. And so I was really interested in maybe talking a little bit about like flashbacks, memory, how that impacts like queer readings of films. And I just thought it was really stylish and beautiful, and I really wanted to rewatch it and talk to Brianna about it and get their thoughts too.
Yeah, I saw this film. I was lucky enough to see it at South by Southwest in 2024 with Jane in attendance, and they were fantastic in discussing the importance of what this film meant to them. Kaylee, you talked about memory. And it might just be my cishet white dude, what do you call them, blinders up for the first viewing of this film. But I definitely saw all of the trans allegories in it. But what hit me the most emotionally was the way it plays with memory and the way it plays with the experiences that we have as young people that shape us, that we often don't feel shaping us until we're older. They are these weird little time bombs waiting to be set off somewhere down the road for us. And watching it, I watched it again last night in preparation for this, and I was just so blown away by like this whole movie is like an episode of my podcast. Like it plays with the same things that I am always trying to get out of guests, that I always am fascinated by, that I always want to talk about. We are going to spoil I Saw the TV Glow on this show, everybody listening. It only came out in 2024, so I'm making sure you know up front we are going to talk about what happens in the movie and get spoilery with it. And if you haven't seen I Saw the TV Glow, like run, don't walk. Go find it, watch it. It's beautiful and frightening and so many things. This is a movie about two teenagers, Owen and Maddie, played by Justice Smith and Jack Haven, who are not friends initially, but they bond through a shared fascination with a TV show called The Pink Opaque, which is, as Kaylee said, it's kind of a nod toward Buffy the Vampire Slayer because it's about teenage girls fighting supernatural monsters. It also has a little bit of that sort of teen Nick thing because they talk about it being a Saturday night show that you have to stay up late to watch. And through The Pink Opaque, these two become friends. But more than that, it feels like the show is sort of pointing the way to their future in ways that are both exhilarating and terrifying. I want to let you both chime in with the story because I want to ask you what reaches out and grabs you about the opening segment of it, because we go through many different eras. It begins in 1996, which I was about Owen's age in 1996. I was right at the cusp of junior high, so I feel that era very strongly. Um, what jumps out at you about the way this film chooses to open up this narrative?
Yeah, something that I really love about this movie, like the opening and closing sequences in particular, but it does it throughout, is how it visually represents memory and visually represents like nostalgia. So many of the locations and set pieces in this film from the get-go feel less like real places and like more just how you remember a place looking as a kid. So it's like there's like a living room, and I remember there being a couch and a TV, and everything else is blurry, and I don't see anything else, and it's all hyper saturated. Like, oh, I have this school, and it makes no architectural sense if you actually try to track where they're going, but like your brain remembers where everything is, and like the lighting is weird and highlights very specific elements that no actual school actually looks like. But like that's what you remember your school looking like, just digging into your memory from your childhood. And I think this movie does like a great job of highlighting like the role of like nostalgia and the role of like salience in what we do and don't remember.
For me, I think the opening where Owen's mom is voting for, and I quote, the saxophone
The
man
saxophone man.
was very evocative because it clearly puts you in a certain era. We know who that is, but also this sense of like the adults being so far from you. Like, who is the saxophone man they're voting for? I remember growing up and seeing images of like wars on the TV, and I just had like no conception of like what this was or who these people were talking about or whatever. And it's like they're so far from you, and I think I really emphasize with Owen's aloneness and the isolation he seems to be experiencing at the beginning of the film, when his mom kind of tries to communicate with him and he doesn't seem to really receive or respond to her. And this might be jumping ahead a little too far, but I have this kind of slightly wonky theory that this movie is in conversation with Mulholland Drive.
I think so too. It's definitely in conversation with David Lynch.
Mhm.
I get the Mulholland Drive vibes as well, which
The
is really interesting.
doubles,
Yes,
the
the
queer
doubles.
elements, the music and the separation between the music and the film itself, because films used to have the music on a sound stage, which is very clear in Mulholland Drive. Also, possible spoilers for Mulholland Drive. But here it's the music is non-diegetic. It's like inserted and it becomes, but then there are also moments of diegetic music where the music is integrated into the story. So there's this also element of like what is real, what is not real, what is the track, what is the actual music that we're hearing.
Yeah, there's a shot early on, and it's not actually in the first sequence because we jump forward several times in the movie, but it's the begin sort of the beginning of the second sequence, which is set in 1998. Um, and it's Owen walking down the hallway, and this hits on something Brianna was just talking about, which is the school doesn't really have a real geography that makes sense, similar to like, and this is Kubrickian because it's literally a steady cam shot in a hallway, much like in The Shining, but it's a shot just following Owen as he sort of listlessly walks through the halls of the school, and all of the walls are covered in what are meant to be motivational signs, and they're all done in that cheap 90s way where someone just got some stencil letters and painted these phrases up with the stencil letters on these black uh, painted plywood, basically, on these walls. And if you went to any kind of like, especially a poorer school in the 90s, you've seen that for sure. And not all of the lights work. Like he goes through spots where the lights are flickering or they're completely off. He passes, he sort of glides around all of the other people in the hallway. There aren't that many, but anytime there's someone nearby, he sort of glides past them. And it has that feeling of And these are both kids who feel stuck in their worlds, who feel lonely in their worlds. And it's got that feeling of like, I don't remember every detail of the school I went to and what it looked like every set. But when I think of it, I think of hallways like that, just sort of endlessly carrying me somewhere. And it might be somewhere I'm meant to end up, and it might not be. Um, and yeah, it has that Lynchian quality of the way it plays with music and with memory. Um, and the interesting thing, and we're jumping ahead again, but I just want to mention it while we're talking about memory, is the film later swerves on you and reveals that your memories might not actually be your memories, at least for Owen and Maddie, because they may or may not be characters in a TV show, which is its own kind of Lynchian thing that I love. Um, that feels very Mulholland Drive and very Lost Highway too. But I want to talk about the Pink Opaque specifically because if this thing existed, I would watch every episode of it without question, multiple times. Um, it's very straightforward. At least at first, it seems to be. It's about two girls named Tara and Isabel who met at summer camp and realized that they have this psychic connection that allows them to communicate and fight evil, even though they live in different places. And they both have these incredible little hot pink ghost tattoos on the backs of their necks, which I've seen out in the wild many times now. Um, as someone who found Buffy on the WB with my rabbit ears in my bedroom when I was, 13 years old or something like that, this hits me in some kind of way. Um, what jumps out to? We'll start with Kaylee this time, and then we'll go to Briana. What jumps out at you about the Pink Opaque?
I think the way that it was lovingly rendered in the film really interested me. I think sometimes there's a tendency to look at older works in kind of a condescending manner, but I felt that the director really recreated that vibe, even with all the corniness and like cheesiness, but without like looking down on it, but with just saying like, hey, this was an experience that these teenagers had and it was meaningful to them. Despite all that. And also, I really enjoyed the kind of like pseudo VHS, visual effects and things like that that were added to make it look even more aged. But that in and of itself is kind of like a visual representation of the blurring of memory and the ways in which memory can distort like visual perception as well. So it kind of became a metaphor in and of itself.
Yeah, I was all up in my nostalgia feels, like going, like looking at that show. Because the thing it reminded me of most, like going over it, was the show Beetleborgs. If either of you remember that one,
That is a deep pull.
where like I was obsessed with that show as a child because it was much more like macabre and dark and had like spookier imagery. He's like, oh, this is like so interesting and fun. And I went back and watched it as an adult a few years ago, and I had that same experience that the character Owen had, like later on in the movie, where he watched the Pink Opaque on streaming. He's like, oh no, this sucks. But like in our memory, it holds just like such this like lofty and important symbolism. And like we remember it being so much more impressive and so much more impactful. And I think the way it's rendered throughout this film really touches on like that idea of like the double edge of nostalgia, where like everything is better if you are remembering how it made you feel at the time, not when you're actually touching back on it again.
And I think that carries over into as this story unfolds pretty much entirely from Owen's point of view, and a lot of it has to do with not just his relationship with Maddie, but how he remembers his relationship with Maddie. Um, like so many of us have had that experience of meeting an older kid who, for lack of a better term, matched our freak. You get a little older, you start getting into the puberty years, and you feel alone and lost and like no one understands you, and then you meet this other kid who is kind of in the same boat, and you feel linked to them in a way that you're maybe never linked to anyone else in the rest of your life. And that feels the way Owen seems to kind of worship Maddie, in part because she has this secret knowledge about this TV show he's fascinated by. Um, but the more the show goes on, Maddie becomes almost this mythic figure for him. And it helps that, she tells him she wants to run away. She has to get out of this town. She hates living where she lives. And then she disappears. So he is left with years of space to just sort of dream about who Maddie is, who Maddie was, what Maddie became, until she turns up again. And it's very interesting, especially thinking in terms of doubles, because it feels like Maddie is the version of Owen that Owen wished he could be. And I relate so strongly to Owen because I feel like I was so often that timid kid who uh, didn't ever quite fit in, and anytime there was an opportunity to sort of leap into maybe a new phase of my life, I was always sort of nervous about it, which I think is definitely true of Owen, especially when Maddie turns back up in his life and says, "I'm going to explain why everything has felt weird to you for the last 15 years." And he just goes, "No, that you're crazy. That is not what's happening right now." The characterization is just so wonderful. I want to go back for a second because there's a question I like to ask, and I didn't ask it to start this discussion, which is, what do each of you remember about the first time you saw this film? What did it do to you?
Yeah, I think in my like very specific experience, that is a very interesting question. Just because like I am non-binary, but I did not come out as non-binary until after I had already seen that movie for a while. So I remember like being like obsessed with I Saw the TV Glow for a little bit. Like I bought the A24 like screenplay book and all of the fancy stuff they had for merch. And I like watched all of the interviews and I saw all of the like connections with We Are Going to the World's Fair, which is Jane Schoenbrun's like first movie that is intended to be in conversation with this one, at least thematically. So I was really, really into it for a very long time. And in retrospect, I feel like it's obvious why. But at the time, I was just like, oh, this movie is cool. I love the themes. I wonder why.
I didn't have obviously as much of a personal engagement with it, although I did relate a lot to, I think, Owen's alienation in more of like a racialized way. Um, I think I was just very taken with the sureness of the direction. I really loved the usage of color. It was very colorful. It didn't do sometimes things that I think happen in some horror films where it's like, well, we're scary, so we can't use any color and it's going to be very like monochrome or whatever. It felt like there was a real art direction there, just the decision to engage with this 90s nostalgia and the movement and surrealism between kind of what's real and what's not real permeating each other felt really interesting. And then I also really enjoyed the pacing. I know a lot of people kind of didn't like it because it wasn't very scary, quote unquote, or it was like too slow. But I liked that we were made to wait for things to happen, that there was this sometimes almost unbearable sense of like something coming, but you don't know what it is, or even like dread or that feeling of being a teenager and like waiting for your life to happen, but it's never going to happen because you're 16 and can't get out of this shithole town. And it's just like that sense being replicated within the film in a way that felt like, honestly, I think sometimes horror movies maybe move too fast for me these days. I feel like we don't always need that kind of pacing, and I appreciated that they took a different direction with that.
It's it's one of those. I mean, the colors. I love. This is a movie that in like the first 5 minutes has the main character underneath a sort of recess parachute toy thing that is basically a giant trans pride flag. So there's there's definitely the use of color. I think is very important in that way, and sort of making the point of pointing toward even down to things like Owen's sleeping bag. Like it's not a typical boy's sleeping bag color, and all of these choices, like it's so confident. And we're all going to the World's Fair, which is for me is for internet subculture what this one is for nostalgic TV fandom subculture. It does the same thing. Jane Schoenbrun is such a confident filmmaker, and they also have this amazing ability to do something I'm jealous of because I don't know that my own writing ever does it. It is, however, something that I think both of you do in your writing. So this is good. From a craft perspective, they have this way in their screenwriting of being simultaneously extremely subtle and not subtle at all. This is not a movie that is going to sit you down and preach to you about why this person's life matters or why this person is different, or preach is probably the wrong word there, honestly, but it's not going to spell it all out for you. It's not going to there's no moment where someone sits down and says, "Hey, you're trans, Owen, and I'm going to explain to you why and how you're trans." It's much more filtered through actual lived experience of characters and tone and pacing. And I found that with both of your books that there is very little in the way of, first of all, they're both very patient books. They both take their time to get where they're going. They're paced in a very literary way that allows for that interiority. And second of all, they are so they're such a clear point of view without ever feeling like everything in the book has to stop so that the characters can explain what the point of view is. Is there, I don't want to ask if there's a secret to doing that, but I want to ask each of you how you navigate that kind of storytelling, the ability to be subtle while also not subtle at all.
Now, I will probably let Kaylee answer the actual question, but I do want to add to what you were saying about Jane's writing. I went back and read the actual script for this yesterday before actually hopping on. And it is also just like a master class in being subtle where it has to be and not subtle in other places. Because the script is much more explicit that, like, this is a queer allegory, guys. Like, flashing lights, I'm just going to say it's a queer allegory in some of the, like, lines in between dialogue. But how that, like, line in between dialogue actually interacts with the character and like how that character is actually embodying what the script is saying they're internally going through, I think is really, really great. Like she is awesome at doing like character emotional subtext, which is probably what my answer would be for like how do you achieve it? Like characters have an emotional subtext that they're never going to explain, but is there and is underlying their beliefs and their thoughts and their actions and their reactions. And as long as that is consistent, like they feel honest and true as a character without you ever having to just explain what's going on. So that's at least what I do, that I very roundaboutly got to explaining.
Yeah, I would agree. I think Brianna and I are very like character and atmosphere driven writers. I don't think I don't want to speak for you, Brianna, but I personally am not so much invested in like plot or as in like things happening or things happening in a certain order or things happening because they need to happen. I think that for me, at least, it should all be driven by the motivations and experiences of the characters. I think for me also it comes from like more of the like opera stage background. A lot of the times opera is about the beauty of the music and it's not even really about the plot at all. Sometimes you sit through like absurd stories just to hear the beautiful sounds coming out of people. So I think for me, it's about like authenticity and characterization, which is sort of vague and ambiguous. Like, what does that even mean? But just a sense of like knowing your characters and like the story you're trying to tell really, really well. And then having the fortitude to tell it, even if it's going to maybe make decisions that aren't super popular right now, like to have a slower pace or to be more subtle. And then I think generally, if you need your character to like stand there and explain anything, you've kind of failed, generally speaking, unless there's like some really important reason you need to be doing that. Um, and Brianna, I've talked about this on other podcasts, but I think we also are very in favor of like complicating kind of staid narratives, especially when it comes to like marginalized characters and oppression. Just going back to like my work and Brianna's work, but we have characters who are people of color or queer, and they may not be portrayed in the most flattering light. And like I think that's a more powerful statement, quote unquote, than having some kind of like idealized character that exists so we can show how like badly we're being treated or something absurd like that. It's more just about exploring the human condition as it might be experienced by like a gay person or a Jewish person or an Asian person or a black person, rather than like trying to make some broad statement about random populations.
This brings up an interesting craft question. Going back to something Brianna was talking about, subtext, and I always find this very interesting to ask writers. And Kaylee, you talked about the importance of knowing your characters. For each of you, is knowing your character on that subtextual level, for example, this character had a psychologically abusive mother, and they don't talk about it, but it's definitely part of their lives, and it exists in the background of this story, and we don't have to address it too much, but it's there. Is that something that you sit down and figure out with a character early in the process, like an outlining, sort of dreaming, blue skying process? Or is it something that you come to discover the more you write them?
For me, I tend to like have very hard-lined ideas of what a character needs to like accomplish in the story. So if they're going to be in the story, they got to be in here for a reason. So what are they going to be doing? And then as I write that out, I like discover what their internal reasons are and kind of like reverse engineer them that way. Something that I mentioned just like in my own like writing workshops like a week or so ago at this point was the idea that you are writing characters who think that they are doing all they can at any given point. It's like they either think the way they're behaving is a good idea or they think it is the only thing they can be doing for whatever reason. And then really digging into, all right, why do they think this is a good idea? Why do they think they're stuck doing this thing? And if they don't think it's a good idea, is where you can get more of that interiority and more of that backstory. It's like, oh, this person is super insecure and like doesn't like making their own decisions. What happened to them? Like, what made them this way? Like, who hurt you? That meme.
I tend to discover a lot while writing. I'm pathologically incapable of outlining. Generally, when I make an outline, I just then immediately ignore it, which is really bad. So I try to discover as I go. I think of it more akin to learning an opera roll. So as I go through and learn the music and the notes and the words of an opera roll, I'll start to discover things about the character. And then I'll maybe try to understand why they do certain things and flesh them out sort of retroactively, because when you're learning an opera, you can't really change the plot of the opera. You just have to do what you have to do. Recently, I came into this when I was learning the role of Madama Butterfly. So the character it was written in 1904 by a white European man. It's not really like an empowered, quote unquote, vision of an Asian woman. She gets pregnant by a American naval officer, and then when he returns after 3 years and demands custody of their child, she gives their child over to him and then dies by suicide. So it's not really something where I, as like a liberated quote unquote person or whatever, or someone who's a feminist, would feel like, wow, this is like a great series of events or something I would totally do. But you really have to like just acknowledge that this is like the character you're playing, and that even if it's different than you or you wouldn't behave that way, you just have to immerse yourself as much as possible. And so for me, I had to find a way into that character. And I tried to think about, like, for example, times I felt degraded in a relationship or that the other person had treated me badly, but I kept going back for more. Like, why did I do that? Like, what is something about myself that might be hidden there that I don't want to acknowledge that I can bring to this character?
So we're deep into this conversation now, and I want to make sure that we get into what for me is the most fascinating part of I Saw the TV Glow. We've talked a lot about memory, and we already talked a little bit about the moment where Owen goes back, and this is adult Owen. He's grown up. His parents are both dead. He owns his parents' old house. He has a family of his own. He can't sleep, so he decides to stream the Pink Opaque, and he discovers, like, this isn't the show. This isn't what I remember. So he sort of talks through what he does remember, what he remembers about the series finale, which happened right around the time Maddie disappeared, and he looks back on it, and the way he explains the series finale is Tara and Isabel are preparing for their final big fight against Mr. Melancholy, who is the man in the moon, who is a terrifying figure, visually and in terms of characterization, just a terrifying figure. And according to him, the way the show ends is Tara tells Isabel, we have to meet. We have to be in person together for this so we can fight Mr. Melancholy and beat him. And Isabel shows up to where Tara is supposed to be and discovers that Mr. Melancholy got to Tara first, buried her alive, and now is going to bury Isabel alive as well. And when Maddie returns to Owen's life, she says that she had this revelation because she was buried alive. And she came to realize when this happened to her that they are Tara and Isabel. Maddie is Tara, Owen is Isabel. They have been trapped in these. The reason they feel trapped in their lives is because they literally are trapped in their lives. Mr. Melancholy got to them and trapped them in this dream world called the Midnight Realm that they can't escape. And so the only way to escape is to realize who they truly are. Like I said, it's not subtle at all while also being subtle. So basically we are then asked, after all of this beautiful nostalgia craft that went into the Pink Opaque, we're basically asked as an audience to understand, like, no, this is the key to who these people are. And first of all, Jane Schoenbrunn doing that, like, I've never seen or read a better description of how a piece of fiction can change you than the way they work that into the end of this movie. But I'm still just kind of floored by it. I feel like I could talk about it for hours. So I'm just going to stop talking and let both of you weigh in on how this all works and part of the story and what impact it had on you.
So for me, I understood this as like a trans allegory and not coming from personal experience, of course. I thought it was really powerful how they sort of reversed what our presumptions are at the beginning of the film, that the pink opaque is the story within a story. It's the false self, and that Owen and Maddie are the real people that we perceive to be sort of the real storyline within this film that we're watching. But then in reversing it, it also, I think, calls to mind the artificiality, and this is again back to Mulholland Drive, of the movie itself. Like, does that mean that we as viewers, like, who is our real self now? Are we sitting here the real people, or are we realer in our reflected images in the silver screen or in a TV show? And I was also taken by the usage of being buried alive as a method of passing between worlds. Um, this idea that to, I guess, potentially literally transition is a kind of rebirth in some sense. That seemed to me what it was conveying. Um, but also the like idea of, I mean, again, potentially a rather dark interpretation, but I did feel like Mr. Melancholy, like I saw some sort of lines being drawn between like depression and alienation and, you know, potentially like suicidal thoughts or thoughts of harming oneself. And so that also may be being tied in there, not necessarily like a clear through line, but just sort of floating around. And then again, also Mr. Melancholy himself is like a symbol of an even older time, because he's, I think, I believe, a reference to Georges Méliès's Voyage à la Lune. So there's this also symbol of, within the 1990s nostalgia TV show, the symbol of evil is heavily influenced or drawn from a symbol of like the very origin of cinema itself.
Yeah, there is so much that I think you could take away from like the twist that, oh, it's inverted and what is real is fake and what is fake is real, and all of the confusion that comes along with that. From like my most recent viewing, like going off of what Kaylee said about the potential darker readings, like I think it's really interesting how ambiguous the decision is at the end. So it is made very unclear whose decision is the right one, either Maddie or Owen, where you can see like Maddie burying herself alive as like an illusion to suicide or suicide attempts, which obviously you don't want Owen to do. But you could also see it, like Kaylee said, as the means of transition or rebirth that just so happens to be terrifying in its own right. So, like, whose perspective you're looking at it from is like incredibly interesting and lends a bunch of ambiguity to it. So it seems like Owen seems to view it as like a kind of social suicide, which is why we get that much more macabre like imagery connected more to Mr. Melancholy. And then Maddie does seem to think of it as liberatory, which is how lots of people also like explain suicidal ideation. So it's a very complicated ending where you're not sure who to root for by the end. Like you're not sure what decision is the correct decision. And it ends very appropriately just in the middle where Owen has had a mental breakdown. It's like, sorry, and then the movie's over. So it leaves you very similar to Owen, just not knowing what to do next.
But he cuts himself open and there's a TV in there. So
Yes.
then is his like innards um like the real self of the TV, or is that like a fantasy that he has of himself?
This is what I was going to ask you both about next. Yeah, is the penultimate scene of, I mean, we were talking about self-harm and suicide attempts. The penultimate scene is Owen using a box cutter to slice his chest down the middle and reveal that there's a TV static inside, and the laugh of relief and understanding and just almost madness that he lets out when he realizes this is then completely cut off by him sort of wandering out of his work where he works at this family fun center and just going, I'm sorry about before. I'm sorry. I'm on some new medication. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Which is further complicated by the film barely acknowledges the other people in the middle of that breakdown. They sort of freeze around him like time stops when he's having this revelation about himself. So building on what Kaylee was just talking about, like what do you each think happens? Where do you think the film is pointing you by the end?
Like, I honestly don't know. I think I saw the TV Glow as one of the best examples of a piece of media where you can take it as supernatural or you can take it as completely mundane. And either of those readings work perfectly well. So I think it's much more hopeful to think that, like, oh yeah, the pink opaque was the real thing. And Owen has realized this and he is presumably going to go bury himself alive and figure out how to get back to the real world and everything's going to be fine. But if you think it is just a mundane world where these people are just incredibly alienated and having a psychotic break together, it is a very, very sad ending. So I think it goes back to the elements of nostalgia again with that. Like, are you going to choose to remember this positively, or are you going to have it be tainted by the reality of what it was now that you're older? And it's really up in the air which one I prefer, to be honest.
Yeah, I'm torn too. I think I'm struck by how normal life is just so unbelievably threatening in the film, which again feels very Lynchian, like the guy behind the diner. That feels like every single moment that Owen has with his coworkers who kind of suck, but like we've all had shitty coworkers. I don't think they've made me feel as threatened as the coworkers do in the film ever. Um, and I think it's like I guess maybe even putting aside the potential trans allegory, the suicide, the nostalgia, I think I'm not totally sure of my reading of the ending, but like one thought that I had was this idea of the TV and the kind of constant return to the TV, where he at first sees it as this really engaging world, this escapist place, and then later as an adult, he sees it as kind of this like flawed, like lack of nostalgia, sort of like dismaying form of itself. but then cutting himself open and the TV still being inside him. I think maybe my kind of very vague and loose interpretation is that this like childlike vitality still exists within all of us, even if we've been beaten down by the outside world, and we can still access it. Maybe not necessarily needing to bury ourselves alive, but that it's in there, but that sometimes the only way to like see it or for it to come out is in moments of great distress.
Yeah, I love. I feel like I could watch this film again like tomorrow night. I watched it last night. I feel like I could watch it again tomorrow night and feel completely differently about it, which I don't think is a mark of an unfocused film. I think it's a mark of a deeply, deeply layered film. And I feel the same way about We're All Going to the World's Fair, and I can't wait for Jane Schoenbrun's next movie, because they're going to play with slasher lore, and that's my favorite. Before we wrap up, I do want to talk about, because this is called The Scares That Shaped Us, and we've talked about a lot of different aspects of that over the course of this discussion. But I know it's fairly recent. We're talking roughly 2 years after the movie came out. But for both of you as creators, what do you feel you got from this film from a craft standpoint, a thematic standpoint, an emotional standpoint, whatever you've liked? We've already talked about the emotional part of it with Brianna a little bit, but I want to ask, what has it done to you as writers that you feel like you're carrying forward into your work now?
I think it spoke to me in the sense that it's a horror movie that provides both darkness but also connection. And I think that's really visceral for me because I tend to find works that have no darkness to be, frankly, overly optimistic. Unfortunately, that's a bit of my own personality peeking through there. And I find works that I feel bring just horror and darkness, but no connection whatsoever. And that doesn't mean optimism, that doesn't mean a happy ending. I just mean that it brings some kind of connection to the audience, to the creator's psyche, to the characters. Um, I think those are really key for me because there's this sense of like chiaroscuro within the work, that there's like this unbelievable darkness. We can go into that again, suicide interpretation or the interpretations of like mental illness or the difficulties the characters go through. But there's also these little like spots of light, these little stars in the horizon, like Maddie and Owen's real friendship that Maddie offers to let Owen run away with them together. And the sense that they came all the way back for them, even if we take the mundane, like, oh, they're all mentally ill and this was just a hallucination kind of thing. That person still had that loyalty to try to come back, even if they believe something false. So I think for me, it reaffirms my interest and desire in horror that has both maybe really serious or intense things, but also like a level of humanity that I feel like they work really well in conjunction together. And when one of them is missing, I do really miss it.
And I really appreciate this movie because it came out at a time when, like, I was also personally struggling with things like writer's voice and like who my audience was and like all of this other stuff. Like, oh, I'm trying to break into the industry. What should I do? And like this movie is an affirmation of something that I am a very big adherent for now, which is like to shift the lens of your filmmaking to not cater towards people who like don't need to be catered to, essentially. So, like, this is a very queer movie made by a queer director, like written by a queer person for queer people to understand. And it does not answer questions that non-queer people might have because it's not made for their perspective and it's not made with their perspective in mind. And like it still got made and people still like it. And it was just very affirming to me from like a filmmaking standpoint that like films and media in general that does not center like majority POVs can be made and can be appreciated still.
Yeah, everybody write your weird thing, whatever it is. If you're scared of it, write it because we need it. And I saw the TV glow as one of those kind of miracles that comes out of something like that. I can't. I've never spoken to Jane Schoenbrun. I would like to. Jane, if you're listening, you're welcome on the show anytime. Um, but it is like Brianna said, it is a film told. It has zero regard for people who might not quote unquote get it. It is there for you to take what you're going to take from it. And it's beautiful for that reason. So Indigent is available right now from Briana and Cox. You should go buy it. You should also pre-order The Minimalist, which is coming out August 18th. Before we let you both go, Briana and Kailee, will you please let the people know where they can find you online?
Yeah, online you can find me just at my writer's website. It's briannaincoxwriter.com. I have like all of my book tour appearances and stuff on there and like other ways to contact me. I'm also pretty active on Instagram and Threads where I talk about horror and books a whole lot on at Pedro Paro too.
Yeah, you can also find me at KaileePedersen.com. That has links to all of my social media. I'm primarily available on Instagram at Kailee_Pedersen. You can see me interacting with Briana / annoying them in their comments section, and also on Blue Sky. And yeah, I also have a bit of a tour coming up. If you want to hear me sing live, I'll be performing actually at the Spooktastic Book Fair. So I have a little bit of a haunted opera program that I've been getting ready for folks.
I don't think I'll be at the Spooktastic Book Fair, but I need to know more about the haunted opera. Someone record it, please.
Yeah, I'm so hyped for the haunted opera thing.
Oh God, I can't tell you how excited just those two words together make me. Our guests have been Briana N. Cox and Kailee Pedersen. Briana, Kailee, this was so much fun. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Yeah, thank you for letting me ramble about this movie for too long.
Yeah, same. It was a great rewatch.
Thanks once again to Kailee Pedersen and Briana N. Cox for being on the show. It was great talking with both of them. Go pick up both of their books. Briana's is available right now. Kailee's is available for pre-order and is out in August. Both great books, great writers. Check out their work and be sure to follow them on socials to keep track of everything they have going on. And if you want to keep track of everything that we have going on here at Scares That Shaped Us HQ, the easiest way to do that is to follow us on Blue Sky. We are at scareshapedus.bsky.social over there. That is where you will find every episode of the show, as well as new guest announcements, giveaways. I've got one of those coming up. So if you want to get some free horror books in your life, head over there and follow us on Blue Sky. You might win a book. We are also on Facebook under The Scares That Shaped Us. If you want to follow us over there, we are also The Scares That Shaped Us on YouTube. If that is how you prefer to listen to your podcast, you can head over there, like, subscribe. We appreciate you. If you like the show, the best way to help us out is, first of all, tell your friends. Second of all, if you are so inclined, head over to the podcasting app of your choice and leave us a 5-star review. That helps us immensely to get the word out about the show, get us boosted on those platforms so that we can reach more listeners and keep doing this cool thing. I'm hoping to have the show back up to weekly by the summer. So there will be much more of The Scares That Shaped Us in the future. And the more listeners we have, the better. I appreciate everyone's support. That is it for us this week. We will be back in 2 weeks with another brand new episode. Not quite ready to announce who will be on yet, but I will make it a fun one, I promise. Till next time, take care of yourselves, take care of each other. I'm Matthew Jackson, and this is The Scares That Shape Us.